So my name's Halima. I'm one of the trustees at the Muslim Institute. It's my absolute pleasure to be chairing this session with, I get the joy of being able to chair a session with two of my very good friends, Leyla and Sahil. And then we also are joined by someone who maybe I can just see if they're here. Yep. Hold on a minute. Is my other panelist here? Yes, Khaldoon's here. So yeah, so the title of this session is sorry. So we also have the chat function. So I've muted you all, but if there's anything you need to say, feel free to use the chat functionality, and that just sort of keeps the panelists able to speak for the first sort of 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll bring you all in for Q&A. But if there's anything you need to say before that, please use the chat function. So this session is called The Limits of Sanity in a Crazy World. And we are joined by three wonderful panelists. So Leyla, Jagiella, Sahil, Warsi, and Khaldoon, I don't have your last name. This is terrible, isn't it?
Khaldoon Ahmad.
Khaldoon Ahmad. Brilliant, thank you. So what I'm going to do is get each of you to just introduce yourself, because I know you've sent me some bios, but it might be better if you set the scene yourselves. So if you introduce yourself, and then just give us 5 to 10 minutes on your thoughts on the title of the panel, what your sort of initial reflections are, your initial responses are. And then what we'll do is we'll sort of weave a discussion between the four of us, and then open up for questions for the last 20 minutes or half an hour, if that's okay. And I'm going to ask Khaldoon to start just because I think your background as a psychiatrist, I think, is just a really great place to maybe to set the scene and to really get us talking. And I was also wondering if you could just maybe make us aware of how we should be responsible with language in terms of using terms like crazy and mad and thinking about people who actually suffer from mental illness. Just to, we use these terms flippantly, and you know, in the medical profession, obviously these words have meaning, and they are for very specific, you know, we use words like crazy, words like madness, and they've got a history, and they also relate to actual conditions and mental illness. So if you could also give us a little bit of a just give us some clarity as to how we could use these words, and then move us into your reflections. That would be wonderful. Is that okay?
Yeah. Are we all introducing ourselves first, or?
Yeah. If you could introduce yourself first, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Yeah. My name is Khaldoon Ahmad. I'm a psychiatrist. I work in the NHS. I'm also a filmmaker, and also have some academic background in medical anthropology. It's nice that there's Sahil and Leyla, anthropologists, here. Yeah, shall I do the others want to introduce themselves?
Sorry, I was going to say, Khaldoon, if you introduce yourself and then just give us your reflections, and then we'll move to Leyla to introduce themselves, give their reflections, and then Sahil introduce themselves. Give their reflections.
That's fine. Yeah, I think first of all, on what you said about using this language, mad or crazy, and what is sane is what is not. I mean, in my job, obviously, I'm dealing with. I mostly deal with people with severe mental illness, but I think language is very important, as you say, and there's all sorts of negative associations surrounding the word mad and insane, and obviously it's a sort of term of abuse as well. And I mean, I think, I think, yeah, there is a potential there, as you say, of people finding these terms difficult, and I think that this is a potentially a difficult discussion, maybe for some people in different ways. So I think it's important to highlight that. I mean, in terms of this subject, on sanity and insanity and what's happening in our world at the time, when Samia sent me a message, she spoke about COVID conspiracies, what's described as mass delusions, and I mean, in some ways, it's quite easy to describe what's happening now in the world as this sort of collective madness. A brief chat we had the other day with the panelists, and we were talking about the US elections, where so many millions of people actually believe that the US elections were stolen, and actually Trump is the winner. So, you know, is that some sort of collective madness? I mean, I think on some levels, yes, but it's something that people are willing to enter into, which is different, obviously, from the work that I deal with. I mean, the patients I have, they have paranoid schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and but I think if we're to use that term of madness and insanity in a more looser way, then I think we sort of need those terms as well to describe what's happening in the world. When I trained in psychiatry, we were taught the definition of a delusion, which is a fixed, false, unshakable belief. And this is also what I tell the medical students and the psychiatry trainees that I work with now, that, you know, when somebody holds a false belief, then you have to examine that and see where is that coming from, and sometimes it is part of a psychotic illness. But I think in a very looser way, there are delusions that people want to believe in. I mean, look at Brexit, for example. I mean, it's such a complex phenomenon, but in part, I think it's driven by delusions about the UK's identity and place in the world, and not examining, you know, Britain's role in imperialism and this exceptionalism, being a different country. In some ways, that is a delusion. You're believing something which is not true, and you think and that can somehow set you apart from the rest of the world. I mean, I was also thinking about, you know, what's been happening in France recently, and what Emmanuel Macron's been saying. And I mean, there's something very sort of shrill and extreme in all of that language. And, you know, how can you possibly adopt that type of language when you know there are so many Muslims in France? I mean, that's not a collective. I wouldn't say, you know, from a theoretical point of view that this is a delusion, but we're in a time where there is some sort of mass thinking, which is not connected to the reality. I mean, going back to the France case, the reality is that France is a multicultural society. I'm no expert on France. I've hardly ever been there, but just thinking about that country, this is the reality, that Muslims live there, non-Muslims live there, and surely you need to be able to live together rather than somehow other a whole population and not be able to deal with that. I mean, I was, in terms of, you know, insanity on a bigger scale. What I also wonder about is also some of the sort of extreme nationalism that we're getting into, in intolerance. I mean, looking at the Indian subcontinent, I mean, it's very clear that so much is being driven by this controlled Indian media and narratives that spread on WhatsApp. If you look at Pakistan, my family's from Pakistan, you see this extreme intolerance, you know, whole, you know, sections of society are suddenly labeled, you know, other, and people actually believe that, and I think it's very hard not to call it some sort of collective insanity. So just some thoughts there. I mean, I think going back, you know, maybe thinking of what I see as a psychiatrist. I mean, now after COVID, we're seeing so much impact of what people have been through, impact on themselves, on their families, seeing death, people losing their jobs, people become mentally ill as a direct result of isolation. In my work, every day I'm seeing the sort of the mental health impacts of the society that we live in. I mean, huge numbers of people in the UK live in poverty. I see a lot of students, a lot of university students. They come from generally middle-class backgrounds, but the levels of mental illness is so high. I mean, people with very severe eating disorders, mood disorders, and I can compare this to 20 years ago when I was a student. I went to university. I had to take loans. There wasn't this pressure on housing, and so I'm thinking, if I'm seeing this impact on mental health on people from well-off backgrounds, what is it like on people who are not from those backgrounds? I mean, I see that as well. I mean, I work in very inner city area of London with a large British Bangladeshi population, and it's very, very clear that the mental health impacts of poor housing, poverty, exclusion, racism, so we also need to look at the mental health impacts of the society that we're living in again.
So maybe thinking about sort of things on maybe a more local level, a more personal level in terms of mental health, but then what you talked about, this idea of kind of a collective madness, or and for you those being some really key points and reflections.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think that I think it was R.D. Laing who said that insanity is a perfectly rational adjustment to an insane world, and I think that, I mean, I see that particularly in some families, for instance, where there's so much disturbance that it's you would expect a member of that family to have almost severe mental health problems. And I mean, R.D. Laing was very good that he said that the person who seems to be crazy or mad in the family actually may be the only sane one. So there's so many dimensions to this question, but especially now. I mean, COVID conspiracy theorists or COVID deniers. I was having a discussion with COVID deniers. I can't believe that they exist, but they do. And last week, and he was saying that it's all made up, and people become ill because they're scared, and it's sort of anxiety reaction. I mean, and I think on some level, I mean, there are many reasons for that, but I think it's some sort of denial happening, not wanting to accept reality, and that in itself is some form of madness, I think.
Brilliant, thank you, Khaldoon. That was some great reflections, and yeah, I think that quote about the R.D. Laing quote, this sort of response that we're living in a sort of what may feel like an insane time, and whether we're talking specifically about sort of the COVID crisis or just the sort of the inequalities and injustices that many people face. So thank you. Sahil, I'm going to go to you next. I'm wondering, Leyla, are you around? Or because I think did your video go off?
No, I'm around. There was a disturbance, for a few seconds, but I'm back.
Okay. So are you able to go next? Because I actually thought it would be great to hear from you, because also about what Khaldoon said about sort of this political sense, and also thinking about Europe and what's going on in Europe. You don't have to reflect on that, but I would, if you could give it some time, maybe at the end of your reflections, that would be really interesting. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you very much. First of all, I noticed some people came in just now, and please, I would like to repeat what was said at the beginning. Please silence your mics. Because there may be some sounds that may be disturbing. I just saw this. Yeah, thank you very much for having me here for this discussion. I'm Leyla Jagiella, and I'm an anthropologist, as Khaldoon already also mentioned, and I'm also working in religious studies. For the past few years, I've been working in several projects with refugees, in particular LGBTQI refugees, who came to Germany from mainstream Muslim backgrounds, or majority Muslim countries. And I'm also a freelance writer. I do, empowerment workshops, give talks and stuff like that, which is actually my main profession at the moment. I'm going to say a little bit on that, maybe a little bit, later. What I'm thinking about this title, about this idea of insanity and craziness, well, there are two things that immediately came to my mind. The first thing is something that I keep telling everybody, and I'm feeling a little bit guilty about it, that I constantly keep telling people this. But in this situation right now, and we just have declared the second tough total lockdown here in Germany today, this whole COVID year, I am very, very well. I'm very happy. I'm doing very good, I'm feeling so great in this whole situation. And I would call this crazy, because I've talked about this before in the context of the Muslim Institute, also written about this. I'm a transgender woman. That means I have a lot of history of trauma, discrimination. I've been struggling for so many years actually with issues of depression, anxiety. They have really become a part of my normality. And this is the first time in my life that I actually feel well adjusted to what's going on around me. I've always felt that the world is structured in a way, well, it's structured against me. But right now I think, oh, this is wonderful, this is great. And I do feel sorry for all the people that this affects negatively. I know that 90% of the people around me do not feel this way about the situation. I feel with them, but I can't help but also think at the same time, well, I've had decades of depression and anxiety. Please, you will survive it. You will be fine having a year or maybe 2 years of depression and anxiety. It's okay. I hope nobody is offended, but from my viewpoint, it's just like that. And yeah, Khaldoon already said that, of course, the way it affects you has a lot to do also with your background, with your stability. I actually, as I said, the workshops and talks that I do are my main profession at the moment, because I actually am unemployed since June. I don't have a job anymore. So this is a problematic situation on a merely financial basis for me as well. My mother has already been in coma 2 times due to respiratory infections. I'm very worried for my mom in this situation. My brother is working, my younger brother is working in the gastronomic field. He lost his job, has no income whatsoever. So my family and I myself, we are affected by this. My partner has just been ordered to go into quarantine for 2 weeks, and it means loss of a lot of extra hours of payment that we would actually have needed. So it's not that I'm all happy and privileged in this whole situation. There's a lot that worries me, but at the same time, I think that these worries have much more to do with the problems of the system as such. If politics support and save banks and big corporations, but they don't help somebody like my brother, then that is a systemic problem. It's not the pandemic that is the actual problem here. If I have to worry about healthcare for my mom, that is a systemic problem. That is not the pandemic that is the issue there. So I worry more about the system, and the situation as such is just wonderful for me. The other thing that I've been thinking about a lot, and that connects to a lot of what Khaldoon has already said, and I would like to hear more from him on that maybe a little bit later in the discussion, that so right when this pandemic started, very shortly before that, we had a right-wing terrorist attack here in Germany. And I remember that I was on a panel on that just when this whole COVID thing started. The first cases were in Germany. We didn't yet know what was going to happen. But the interesting thing at that time was that, so the public discourse, or a lot of the media discourse on this right-wing terrorist attack was, oh, this is a crazy guy, you know? And he did display a worldview that was marked by paranoia, that was marked by conspiracy theories, you know, similar to what we've heard about, you know, the mosque shooter in New Zealand, or other right-wing attackers like that. He seemed a truly disturbed person. But the strange thing is, now that I'm looking back to it, I realized that a lot of these conspiracy theories that he had are the same that now thousands of people profess, who go on the street right now. We have these anti, what you call these, like these anti COVID-19, not anti COVID-19 protests, but, you know, protests against the decisions of the government. And there are thousands of people here in Germany who go on the streets now and who protest against that, and who also have partly become violent, and it's a very disturbing situation. And they share the exact kind of conspiracy theories that this right-wing attacker shared. And I really wonder where, you know, where is that point, you know, when the one, yeah, exactly, in the chat somebody said deniers. Yeah, so COVID-19 deniers, it's not only deniers, it's also people who do accept that this virus exists and that there is a pandemic, but still they believe there are evil forces behind the vaccination plans and all that stuff. And yeah, I really wonder where is that exact point, you know, when do we speak of a social phenomenon, and when where's the tipping point, you know, when we can clearly see that the ideas are the same, the paranoia is exactly the same, the conspiracies are exactly the same, and still when we have a single individual, we very easily look at the personal history of that individual and wonder what has gone wrong, or what's wrong in his brain, or whatever. But as a society, we don't treat it that way, and we see it in a very different way. And I find that in connected to this particular case, I find that very yeah, in your face thing that needs to be discussed and talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Leyla. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move over to Sahil. Sahil, if you can unmute your mic. If you could start with introducing yourself, give us your initial reflections, and yeah, if you want to also come back to anything that Leyla or Khaldoon have mentioned, that would be great.
Oh, great. Also, could I ask you how much time, where we are on time? So I'll just kind of...
Yeah, we're good. So I'll stop you. If I'm going to give you like 5 to 6 minutes, and if you go over, I'll interrupt.
Lovely. All right. So I'm Sahil Warsi. I'm like Leyla and Khaldoon. I'm also an anthropologist. Kind of like also both of them meandering my way through music and mental health and public health and migration. But through that, there's this string, I guess, of how to work with complexity, and that's kind of where my response comes from. I also co-lead the Nurashki Jarahi kind of zikrs and other activities in the UK, and that's going to be a little bit important as well. Which mostly we were doing it in Leeds, a little bit London. Now it's all online, so if anyone wants to join our zikrs or other activities, they're more than welcome to. So yeah, I mean, this topic I think between or among us, we kind of wanted to talk about several things, and Leyla and Khaldoon have very eloquently touched on several of the points that I would like to make, but from sort of a different angle. I do most of my work these days. I work as an independent consultant, and for the last 2 years, I've been working with the World Health Organization, guiding a lot of research and training and policy around vaccine introduction, vaccine implementation, antimicrobial resistance, basically lots of socially complex public health issues and how to advise countries on dealing with them. And what's interesting to me is, listening to Khaldoon and listening to Leyla, really, you kind of see these tensions coming up, the individual and society, sort of structural issues versus more localized individual issues. And I think when we were talking about this, what I was kind of thinking was, we talk about sanity or insanity often within power dynamics, as Khaldoon mentioned, but then also sort of with this idea of normality and rationality. Whereas if you come from more maybe traditional perspectives or traditional spiritual and religious perspectives, there's a sense of, there are multiple rationalities, multiple ways of knowing, multiple ways of being even in the world. And perhaps it's really historically recent that we've had these moments of having these ideas of certain truths, which of course, we critique and delve into. And I think for me, when we were talking about this earlier, it was this exact question of, do we call this a mass delusion? Is it insanity? And part of me wonders, if maybe we're just going through some kind of transformative period, because it's not just now that we're seeing, vaccine denial. It's not just now that we're seeing all these people holding incredibly xenophobic ideas that are not grounded in truth or reality. It's maybe more so that they are more easily available, aired, readily expressed, etc. And I know I only have 5 minutes, so I think for me the question is really, we do our zikrs, and you often get people coming to the zikrs who do themselves have some kind of mental health issues, or that are not being, them perhaps not being caught by the structures in place, or perhaps have had a bad experience. And I think, what happens in these spaces that you open up, it sort of allows for people living in complete different worlds sometimes, or having different rationalities, different experiences, to be part of something in their own way and be there present solely because they're there for, something that might be shared, and they can be there in whatever capacity to whatever degree they can. And I wonder if, what we see on the outside is sort of an opposite of that. It reminds me a little bit of, kind of Sartre's, statement that hell is the others, which we usually tend to, take as, oh, that means that, everyone's a dick. Excuse my language. But, really, I think what he was going for was more that if our relationship to ourselves is unstable, and of course this is, you go in any religious text, this is also the same thing, your relationship to the divine within yourself, if it's not stable and strong, that will manifest and reflect and kind of be reiterated in your relationship with the world and other people around you. And so, I mean, going to these structural things, I think it makes it complicated. For, right now I'm actually working on COVID-19 vaccine introduction research in several countries, trying to see what are things we'll need to do to prepare people and stuff. And to be honest, the people who present vaccine hesitancy recognize certain structural problems that are not untrue. The fact that big pharma operates the way that it is, it doesn't deny the truth of what a vaccine does, that it's needed and all that. But I think, what Khaldoon was talking about, the politics of deploying these terms, such as crazy, if you're using it to talk about Tories and Republicans or Nigel Farage or whomever, of course we're using it politically, and one can debate how useful that is. But then, we also have to take into account that sometimes they have a rationality that's not irrational. These vaccine hesitancies are also grounded in real concerns. The problem, of course, then comes, I guess, it's very wonderful to say, oh, there's radical multiple universes and realities, and we can, all, but then the problem then comes when we have to live together, and what do we do now with these very complicated situations? Does it serve our purposes to, engage with people by saying, well, you're just, a bumbling fool? Or, should we recognize that, well, maybe they're not even going to count, in this moment where anyone can go online and find whatever information they want to support themselves and say, well, anything else is fake news. Is it worth engaging with them? To what extent do we engage? Do we maybe limit certain truths that we hold in terms of liberty and freedom? And can we be nuanced and flexible enough to know when to do that and when not to do that? And I think none of these have easy answers or clear answers. And, that very easily can then bring us back into this space and moment where we ourselves feel crazy, because we recognize the immense complexity of the political, social, material even complexity of these issues, but nonetheless we have to act, and that means we have to take certain difficult decisions. So I think that's around 5 minutes, and I'm not sure, but I'm happy to go on.
That was brilliant. No, that was perfect. I mean, if you have, we're just after 2:30, so that was perfect. Thank you, Sahil.
Yeah, well, thank you.
So we've got half an hour left. I wanted to just quickly, because Sahil, you obviously got to listen to the other two panelists and then sort of respond to them. I just wanted to quickly bring in Khaldoon and Leyla, and just kind of reflecting on what you've all said. And I think what I've really heard is madness. Like, what are the standards? What is sanity and what is insanity? Like, who gets to decide that? And sometimes when we're and we talked a lot about in and out groups and othering of people. And sometimes if you feel like you've been othered, it's easy to maybe see that the group that's othered you is mad, or is somehow responding to the truth of the world they're living in a way that seems insane or seems wrong. And I sometimes worry, we think about like the Muslim condition. And some of the people, well, I remember growing up when we talked about, the answer is khilafah. And I remember, going to mosques and being given leaflets that the world was mad. There was definitely everything that was going on was wrong and mad, and the solution was khilafah, or the solution is X, or the solution is Y. And this sense of like belonging. And so this world is mad, and what's going on is very hard to process, no matter where and in what time you're living in. 100 years ago, if you think about when Iqbal was writing, and what he was writing in response to like the breakdown of the empire and what was going on, we often feel that we're living in mad times, or we're living in insane times. And I just wondered if you could just sort of just give us a couple of reflections on, what if there is a collective madness, or if there is a sense that the world that we're living in is somehow the response to it could only be insanity. What resolution, like how do we get out of this situation? What is the way forward? Do you have any thoughts about what that might look like? And that's a huge question, I know, but I want to go to Leyla first and then to Khaldoon. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, this is such an amazing question. So I think both Khaldoon and me are very eager to say something on this. Oh yeah, it's quite a thought. What do we? I mean, I actually have to say that very recently, I've become very fond of this idea of apocalypse, in the way that I think we've been fed. The way we grew up, for example, we've been fed a lot with this idea of progress and everything is going to be better, and I think that also creates a kind of mental delusion in a way. And it's much easier actually to accept that maybe this is not going to happen and things are just going to be worse and worse and worse, and then wonder, okay, what do I do with that? How can I deal with that? Can I build up inner resilience still? And of course, there's also a very religious perspective, because as Muslims, if we take our traditions seriously, this is what we are supposed to believe anyways, and also other traditions. You know, the Hindus have their Kali Yuga, and you know, Christians believe that the Antichrist will come and all of that. So this is something that's embedded in our in religious faith a lot as well. And then we have to see, okay, how do we save our souls in this kind of situation, and just hope for the Messiah to come at some point. It's not too bad a way to deal with this, but a problem that I see with this is, of course, a bit like what you said about the Khilafat thing, is that we all tend to project our own ideas of evil and good on that, you know. And I recently saw I saw an interesting documentary on a Catholic exorcist, and it's I found it quite intriguing. I'm sure this guy helped a lot of people with what he did. But at the same time, you know, he was a conservative Catholic, and he said, yeah, the influence of the evil is just growing and Satan is everywhere, and you can see, and you know what he means by that. You know, he does not only mean exorcisms that he has to perform, but he means gay marriage, he means abortion, he means, I don't know, Marxists at universities and whatever, you know. So this is something yeah, that's very dangerous, and that we all need to be careful. I mean, me as well. Everybody, we need to be careful of this, that with these ideas of evil in society and madness around us, we don't fall into these traps of projecting our own ideas of good and evil constantly on what is happening around us.
Go for it, Khaldoon, please.
Yes, I mean, both Sahil and Leyla talked about such interesting things. I mean, I think the apocalypse is also something I was thinking of, but seeing that really as a defense mechanism or a way of coping with our reality. And I think, you know, we live in this type of world where you know, I think in our minds we want to resort to some sort of very clean sort of solutions or narratives. And, you know, of course, in our minds and in the societies we live with, we're surrounded by you know, these constructed narratives of where we're going as a society, when actually we deep down we know that's not true as well. I mean, I think what Sahil said was very interesting about rationality and irrationality, which is always connected to idea of madness and what is not mad. And I think this is also very related to the modern world that we live in. I mean, we know that historically madness has been almost embraced. I mean, the most important, one of the most important figures in Islamic literature is Majnun, who's, you know, the madman who's completely embraced. And I think it was Michel Foucault who said that the madman had to become a problem in the age of rationality, and then also had to be locked up. So, I mean, only 60 years ago, hundreds of thousands of people in the UK, and actually, you know, similar amounts in other countries, were actually locked up in asylums. And you know, when we don't live in that sort of world anymore, but we do live in a world where it's very easy to label somebody mad. And I think, you know, Halima, you mentioned this sort of othering of the mad person. I think this is also a process that we're seeing all the time, and it also reflects some ideas of rational and irrational. So it's much easier to label in Western societies, to label the other mad, for instance. I mean, in my field, for example, in psychiatry, black people are much more likely to be that behavior is considered to be mentally ill or mad when it maybe not, but actually we also know that rates of mental illness in all ethnic minorities in the UK are very high, and rates of psychosis are much higher in African Caribbean communities, which is also very, very concerning as well. But this othering aspect is a major issue, and I think it does reflect ideas we have about not being able to deal with another person's madness as well, and actually our own madness. I mean, I think we all have this experience, maybe not all, maybe of severe mental illness, but we all can understand what it means to feel like we're falling apart, or that things are not right, or we can't find any stable ground to stand on, or confusion, all of these things. And so we all have this in ourselves, and I think we have a fear as well of insanity, madness, because we also don't want to lose our minds as well. And just one thing about the terrorism and madness, I think that's a very, very interesting question as well. I think in the past maybe 10 or 15 years, some psychiatrists have really got into this type of research, looking at the psychological profiles of terrorists and Islamist terrorists, and in particular, and so on, see if there's any commonalities, or that specific types of mental illnesses which occur. And the results of that research is that they're actually barking up the wrong tree. I mean, there is actually nothing there. I mean, you're not more likely to be a terrorist if you're mentally ill, or vice versa. That's not to say people who go on these shooting rampages don't have mental health problems. I mean, I think they probably do as well.
Thank you, Khaldoon. I mean, I think race now seems to have come up, and I think that's really interesting. I'm going to go to some questions and then bring you all back in. So just bear with me while I... so can I first bring in Timothy Bartle, please? You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Right. I'd like to take my point of departure from the concept that was introduced a few moments ago, the apocalypse. The interesting thing about that term is what it meant originally. It's the title of the lost book in the Christian Bible, and it means unveiling or unmasking, and it was written by its author to unmask the idolatrous pretensions of the Roman Empire, which claimed the emperor was God, ought to be worshipped, and persecuted Christians for refusing to do so. My question is, to all of the panelists, what social pathologies, if any, has COVID-19 unmasked or unveiled?
Fantastic question. Does any of the panelists want to raise their hand if they want to go first, and then they can do that? Sahil, do you want to go?
I was actually saying it's up to you, Halima, but I mean, I don't know that I'd be so qualified. This is not my area of expertise, but just from a completely lay perspective, I think if we're talking about social pathology, I think definitely what we see in this moment is an unmasking of the kind of result of unbridled individualism and capitalism, and how structurally our societies are falling apart at the core. I mean, I think that we just see that everywhere. What's interesting perhaps is that we're still stuck in this rut where I think, one would assume that the response to this would be people are out in the streets, raising hell, burning down the old systems, and that's clearly not happening. And I think maybe, to me, what's more interesting is to ask the question, what is the fear? What is holding us back from seeing all of this and not doing it? I think someone mentioned agency in the comments, and that's something that I'm constantly talking about with research when we're doing this policy work, is you have to think these are actors, they do stuff, they make decisions. How do we understand I noticed there's other Mirs on the call as well. This is something at the University of Leeds we worked on as colleagues. But yeah, I think that I'm reminded of a Turkish ilahi, kind of a Turkish song by Yunus Emre, which talks about the self inside the self, of course, like the divinity of that. I mean, one could spend probably a year talking about this. There's a line in there which goes something like, Sharia and tariqat are the ways to truth, but haqiqat and marifat are of the moment. And I think that's something I think about a lot, is it that, we're missing that haqiqat and that marifat. By not being in the moment, by not acting in the moment, by not recognizing what we're seeing in the moment, by being too afraid to. Well, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahil. So I'm gonna bring Shannon in, and then Khaldoon and Leyla can respond to Shannon's question, which is also related to apocalypse, or the previous question, depending on sort of where they want to take the discussion. So Shannon, do you want to come in?
Yep. Thanks so much, Halima. Thanks to all three of you. I'm sorry I missed a few minutes at the beginning, but I was really struck by what Leyla said about being fascinated by the apocalypse and what some of you have said about agency. And I just sort of wanted to bring the two things together in this question. And I take Timothy's point that, the original meaning of apocalypse was, this kind of revelation, unveiling, unmasking, or whatever in the Christian Bible. But, the way we understand it is like, it's kind of this lead up to this cataclysmic event, that's going to happen, right? But if we think about agency, there are different ways that people in history have thought of this cataclysmic event. On one level, I think, especially in the Abrahamic faiths, it's like, it's going to happen. This is in the plan. We will all be destroyed. But what we can do to save ourselves is just be the best Muslim/Christian or Jew or whatever that we can be. So there's that kind of agency in the picture. And then there have been groups that have thought, actually, we can do something. We can do something to usher in the coming of the Messiah or whatever, or this Armageddon, Armageddon type battle. And that can go into two different directions as well, because one can be, what we can do is work together to make sure that, we achieve progress. There's a kind of utopianness about this. It's positive. And the other kind of action is, well, it's all going to go to hell in a handcart. We need to speed this up. We need to be participants in this battle. And we really need to make sure the world is destroyed so that something new can be created. So, it's a much more catastrophic view of the apocalypse and what we can do to usher it in. So I think there are these different kind of approaches that religious believers especially have thought about salvation and apocalypse. And what you're talking now about, I think we've touched on vaccine, vaccine skeptics and so on, COVID skeptics. We could take climate skeptics as well, maybe. I was just wondering if you had a way of, bringing that in, because I think that is interesting what Leyla raised about the apocalypse and also this conversation about agency.
Thank you, Shannon. That was a lovely way for bringing that together. Thank you. Leyla, do you want to respond?
There's so much. I think we need another hour for this topic, actually. And I'm also really looking forward again to hear what Khaldoon has to say on this. Yeah, oh, wow. That's really, I think, gosh. First of all, what Timothy said, of course, we don't actually have this term of apocalypse. We appropriated it in a Muslim context, as we appropriated a lot of other stuff from Christianity as well, I guess. And yeah, but I was thinking a bit of the Quran is also called the Furqan. And Furqan is actually something that's it's splitting good and evil in a way that it separates it so that it becomes more clear. And I feel a bit that cataclysmic situations or what we experience as somehow cataclysmic situations or run up to cataclysmic situations is doing that. And but apparently it's not doing that to everybody. And I'm always astonished that for example, as I mentioned before, we now have the first day of another hard lockdown here again, and some of the measures are just crazy. And I again, the word crazy, and I just can't help thinking that, as what Sahil said about vaccine skepticism, I'm definitely not with the COVID deniers and these QAnon people, but I kind of understand how you sometimes can look at these things and wonder what's going on up there with the politicians, So right now I'm not allowed to take a solemn walk at night outside. Here is basically just a cemetery in the woods anymore. But at the same time, nurses and other health professionals are still some of the worst paid people in this country, So what is it actually that this brings to the surface? What changes are actually made? It's all really, really strange, and it just makes it much more clear to me that I would say neoliberal capitalism is one of the biggest social pathologies that has ever existed in society, and it continues to be so. Shannon, I'm still thinking about the stuff that you just said. It's such a wonderful input, but I think I just can say that I perfectly agree. Yeah, there are these two sides to this, and I think personally for me, the best input is the one that in Islam has been given by the mystical traditions, and that it connects to what Sahil said already, that the tariqat, the ma'rifat and the haqiqat is in the moment, is in the now, and so we do not have to see these kind of apocalyptic scenarios as historical developments, but it's also something that we carry with us, and that maybe there's a tradition both in Shia Islam and in Sufism, in the works of Ibn Arabi, we find it, that the Mahdi can only work when he has his helpers. The Messiah can only help and appear when he has his helpers in the world. And I think we just all have to try becoming, or aspiring to become one of these helpers.
Yeah, Khaldoon, sorry, I saw you edging towards your unmute, and I was just giving you the heads up. Carry on.
Yeah, no, it's such interesting thoughts from Timothy and Shannon and from Leyla and Sahil. It's very, very interesting. I think I'm still thinking about this. So the unmasking, I think, is a brilliant. If you were to sort of sum up everything about what's happened this year, I mean, it is, I think, a big sort of unmasking. I mean, in the UK, definitely, of sort of inequality, of care home workers and NHS frontline staff, bus drivers who still had to go to work being exposed to COVID and then, dying. I mean, so many healthcare workers have died, apart from everything else. And I mean, this is just the sort of exposure of the very cruel world we live in. Yeah, that's all I had to add. I did see Zia wanted to say something. I'll be very interested to hear what he has and what comments he has.
Okay, so we've got Scott and Zia that wanted to come in. Scott, was there anything you wanted to add to the comment on the chat?
Yeah, I was just going to, because the thing on apocalypse, which I think Shannon actually kind of touched on what I was going for, is to me, apocalypse is kind of a cop-out from a certain extent, right? Because then you can deny responsibility. Oh, it's not my fault, it's God or whatever. And because of that, I think that adds into my comment about agency, because agency is also a double-edged sword. Because, well, for a couple of reasons. There's the you want to give agency to those who have been denied it or been denied a voice, but you also want to, the people who have agency, you can't diminish, or else you create these silent majorities, which cause all kinds of problems vis-a-vis Trump. And so there's all of this, because we've talked about, you know, madness or insanity, but I think infectiousness and neoliberal capitalism, I think, is a great example of what Leyla had spoken about. And how do we, because I thought of there's this example from upstate New York where these high school students all developed a tic. It was like a Tourette's-like syndrome, I think 2012, and no one knows why. And it happened and it spread. Kids who were not in the same cliques just started developing these tics at this, and then staff members later on developed it. And there's been a lot written on it. So I don't know if any of you, they're wonderful kind of a case study, I suppose, but no one's really given a definitive answer to me what was going on. And so all of this, and then just the concepts of agency and how can we really work with that, and the responsibility that comes with agency. So I want to have my freedoms and rights, but I have to bear a responsibility for those freedoms and rights. And so I just kind of give that to the group. Thank
you, Scott. And Haroon, can I give you 1 minute and then we will go to Zia?
Yeah, I've had my question answered. It was Sajjad who had his question up, had his hand up.
Sajjad, did you want to come on? You've got a minute and then we're going to finish with Zia.
I typed a note in for Sahil, you know, in terms of your dhikr, and you've talked about haqiqat and marifat, but you know, just sort of the presence of the dhikr, the constancy of it, what does it do to help you and people you know, but potentially others, prevent the type of conditions that we've touched upon here?
And can I just go to Zia and then we'll close with like a quick 10 seconds from the panelists. Zia?
I have to say that I was kind of a bit depressed with this apocalyptic thought, and hadith occurred to me, which in our group we have cited pretty frequently. Beautiful hadith of the Prophet, which says that if you think the world is going to end tomorrow, and you have a seed, plant it. Now it says two things. One, it says that there's not going to be any apocalypse because there is a future. If you plant a seed, well, clearly it's going to grow and, you know, be nourished by you and will become a tree. So that's the first thing. Second, it says that you have agency. So even if you think there is an apocalypse, you can actually change the coming of the apocalypse. You can do something. There is a sort of apocalypse approaching now, and Shannon should have pointed that out, or I think he will point it out when he gives his presentation, of climate change, of what is happening in terms of there are mega changes. They are around the corner within 10 to 15 years. You know, if entire Maldives disappear, that's apocalypse for the Maldives. Mm. It is there. It's going to disappear within 10 years, right? In a sense, the question is: are we going to allow it to disappear, or are we going to do something about it? And are we going to think about the future of all those Maldives who will be without a home in 10, 15 years? What are we going to do about them? How are we going to find them new homes, right? So if we simply focus on the apocalypse, it's closing of the mind. I think we need to focus on the hadith, on the question of agency, and on the question of how you transform and change the world, right? I think a number of people have kind of raised this question. Timothy's question about pathologies is a very interesting question. What COVID-19 has done is not so much to introduce new pathologies, but it has shown us how many pathologies we have learned to live with. The pathology of massive inequality, massive and cruel inequality. The pathology of neoliberal economic system that is designed to aggregate wealth in fewer and fewer hands. You know, the pathology of perpetual growth, which we know from vast amount of research that if we continue to grow even at less than 2%, we will need the resources of several planets to accomplish the goal. So all these pathologies have come to the pathology that the world will continue as it has always done. Right. So these are the pathologies that have come to the fore that we have now suddenly realized, and we are confronting it. Finally, the two other things about insanity. One I think is that the more complex the society becomes, the more uncertainty is increased. And the more uncertainty is increased, the more people want to hold on to certain level of certainty, because they cannot cope with the complexity, the rapid accelerating change of the world, right? Or their own world, how they perceive their own world to be collapsing. So the Trump followers, for example, see their own world collapsing. Their privileges or their understanding of whiteness or whatever, something is going on that they just cannot understand, right? And that has introduced a lot of uncertainty into their own lives. And therefore, uncertainty and complexity go hand in hand with certain level of insanity, where you have situations which are so complex that they are beyond our understanding, where you have uncertainty that is touching not just you, but people around you as well, and the society as a whole. You're going to find people who just cannot remain in a sane, sensible way as we assumed sanity to be, right? They have to find it, they find a different thing. Finally, I will say zikr is wonderful. We should all go and have zikr, but zikr is not the solution to the problem of humanity and mankind, right? I mean, by definition, I mean, we had lots of zikr. Everybody's going on mad at mysticism. That's fine. I love mystics. And I have great love and admiration for Ibn Arabi and great thinkers like that. But zikr may be an answer to your personal problem, but it cannot be socialized in the sense that it is the answer to the problems of humanity as a whole, right? Or even a solution to the Muslim kind as a whole.
No, absolutely. Zia, thank you. I think that was a wonderful sort of summary of and perspectives. We are out of time, and I noticed the panel nodding along as Zia was talking, especially this point around the hadith of the Prophet around if the end times come, continue to plant that seed. And so I think if we can finish this with this idea about that agency and that we must continue to fight the good fight, we must continue that struggle, and we can't absolve ourselves of the situation and the inequalities and injustices within which we all live. So thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you so much for the questions. And I really apologies that we've gone 3 minutes over. Thank you so much. Let the conversations continue on the chat, online, on Twitter. Thank you all for joining. It's been really great.